Hello everyone, my name is Nick Lyons and I'm a senior motion designer at Territory Studio in London. Today I'll be going over the workflow and breaking down the different project files of the user interfaces we created for the new Guardians of the Galaxy ship in the new Infinity War. And I'm going to go ahead and show you a reel breaking down some of the work that we've done at Territory, showing you some of our user interface and future user interface work. And here it is. All right, so that's a bit of the work that we've done. A bit about myself is I work at Territory Studio in London. We have a San Francisco office as well and a New York office. I moved from California to London 4.5 years ago. I have some behind the scenes footage of me making my way from the beautiful hills of Los Angeles to the very green hills of London. And the work that we do at Territory is quite varied. It's across a very broad spectrum of different types of films, different narratives. We work with a lot of different clients and directors. The one thing that unifies all the work that we do is our vision of creating futuristic technology. And it's we talk with the directors and kind of figure out how this technology works, how people interact with it, what it does, and what it looks like. The work that we do and are known for mostly is the screen graphics work, like I showed you in our reel, but we also do a lot of other different types of work, different categories such as brand, experience, installation. We do a lot of interactive work, and all these different types of work feed into each other. So we take different workflows that we've learned from our experience and branding. We do some projection work. We have basically a large list of a large amount of different pieces of like technology in the office all the time and kind of like new tech. We work in a very technical part of London where people are sharing information and tools all the time, so it gives us a very unique flavor and ability to test and experiment. When you walk into our studio, this is what you see on the side of the wall. You'll see some of the films and some of the projects we've had the chance to work on. You can also see the foundation of our studio is built on design, story, and technology. So these are kind of the pillars of the studio and what we kind of strive to use and work with every single project. The story itself is usually given from the client, from a director. What we'll normally do with that story is we'll take it, we'll create some concepts and designs based on that story, but we'll also give them some suggestions and ideas on how we can push that story further to places that they didn't think they could initially push it, and use those different technological aspects that I was talking about earlier. Territory is a very interesting place, a very open and creative place. If we want a new plugin, new software, new type of headset, or want to experiment with different types of tech that are coming out, we usually get it, we play around with it in the office, figure out how we can implement this and use this in our day-to-day workflow. We've come out with projects recently where we use a lot of Connect work for feature film, creates LiDAR data. all kind of very interesting work that has been around for a while, but applying it to a commercial production line is very exciting and also very, feels very adventurous. The common link that we use to create all this work is the Adobe Suite. We use After Effects, Illustrator, and Photoshop. Generally, those are kind of the holy trinity of motion graphics work. The work that we did on Infinity War is a type of work that we call in the industry on-set graphics. So this is the set of American Assassin, and this is a movie that came out a year or so ago. And in this scene, we had to fill about 30 different monitors with content. And all this content was relayed to us by the director, the type of stuff they needed. They had a certain look and feel. They wanted to feel very technical, very CIA kind of government kind of intelligence. What we ended up doing was we created all this work, dozens of different screens and maps and user interfaces, all using Illustrator and After Effects for the majority of the work. When the difference between on-set graphics and visual effects is on-set graphics are done in camera. So the director will shoot all the work in camera and not take it to post. So generally this makes our life easier because we're able to have a very close relationship with the director. We're working with them day to day. We generally send, that's one of our guys, we send them on set. We normally have a laptop, just a very simple workstation, and what we have to do and we have to keep in mind in our workflow is to keep everything really fast, really flexible, because what happens is in a scene, there could be a change. Sometimes an actor will move in front of a screen that was supposed to be a hero screen. We have to change it to another monitor. We have to change the content on it. Sometimes they'll want new maps with new information. We have to create brand new content on set as well. So it can be a very kind of interesting experience. If you worked in a production pipeline before, you understand that deadlines can be stressful, but when you're waiting on set, when you're on set and you're having people, big name directors and actors that are waiting for you to get your work done, it incentivizes you to work with tools that make that easier for you. So a lot of the work I'll be showing you today and the breakdowns of the work that we've done, I'll show you how we thought through this process and created it as simply as possible. All the work that I'm showing you today is not done with any special plugins. It's done with the default tools that we have in After Effects and Illustrator. You can do any of this stuff right out of the box the moment you get this software. This is the set of Guardians of the Galaxy. We had a lot of different screens to fill. If you watch the second Guardians of the Galaxy, you know their ship was destroyed. They have a brand new ship in Infinity War. This ship needed brand new content. It needed new screens. A lot of the screens were these glass panels that you see on the bottom here, but we have a lot of interesting kind of oblong-shaped screens, non-HD screens, which proved to be an interesting challenge because generally you'll create work that's 16:9 or HD. We were creating work in different aspect ratios that we hadn't used before and different shapes, strange shapes, and I'll show you how we kind of worked around that in a second. I'm going to go ahead and show you our Infinity War reel. This will give you an idea of the type of work we did on this project, the different kind of the span of the user interfaces we created, and I'm going to talk about and compare and contrast the previous work that we did on the first Guardians of the Galaxy and how that changed to Infinity War. that kind of gives you a very broad overview of the type of work that we did. So when we reimagined this ship, it was important for us. We spoke with the director at the very beginning of the process, and he wanted to keep the work that we did in a similar vein as the previous Guardians of the Galaxy, but also kind of had to reflect the new ship that they were in as well. So all the elements that we created were in a different kind of this like very saturated kind of overly saturated form. Everything had to be very abstract, very nebulous. It needed to look like it was still a ship that was forming its interface as they were moving through, as they were beginning to use it, and something that wasn't as concrete as the previous ones. Some of the previous screens that we had and created for the original Guardians of the Galaxy were obviously the color palette was completely different. You take a look at kind of the detail that we had in these. It was scaled back quite a lot more in the new Infinity War, and these are the new designs. So you can see the top two very abstract. You probably would have no idea really what they're for, what they do. That was kind of the brief that we had initially. We also created some more concrete examples of what's happening in the ship. Like there's this gunner pod and the health, safety of this ship. So what I'm going to show you today is a breakdown of the gunner pod down there and the user interfaces we created in After Effects and Illustrator, and just show you how that workflow kind of works and our thought process behind all of that. So I'm going to go ahead and pop into Illustrator, and this is our file. You can see that it's kind of has this interesting shape and dimension to it. So what we ended up doing was we created all these screens in like a standard rectangular dimension, and we applied these mats, these custom mats based on the shapes of the screens that they were giving us. What we normally do is if you're beginning to work in Illustrator and you want to create user interface work, just grab a sketch pad, get your basic idea of what you want to create on the sketch pad, because essentially when you're looking at a lot of this work, it looks very complicated, and there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of shapes. Generally what you want to do is we draw out all of our interfaces first. We figure out what they mean, because when you apply a meaning to an interface, it makes it a lot easier to think about how you want to create it. If you're just trying to fill space with different little widgets and kind of shapes, it makes it a lot more difficult to kind of suss out your composition. So it's really important to kind of look at this from a practical standpoint. So all these interfaces are very futuristic, and people don't actually interact with them. So it's nothing like you'd find on like an Apple or iPhone, but they still have to have functionality. It still helps kind of looking at it from that standpoint. So what we normally do when we open up our Illustrator file and we start a project is we go into our settings and we make sure we work to a grid the entire time. So this is a grid, one of the grids, the grid system in Illustrator. It allows you to kind of see, you can see that everything, all these little arrows and everything are all aligned to this grid. So if you work in graphic design, you understand that aligning things to a grid is kind of the fundamental basic of working in design. So it creates you can create the composition. The composition flows a lot better in a grid. You can create and you can also align things to it, which make it look neat and tidy. And the most important part about creating an interface is it has to look neat and tidy. It can't look sloppy. So if something's not aligned to that grid, it's not going to look correct. Doesn't matter how beautiful the icons you use are. And what you can also do is you go into your settings here, and you click on Snap to Grid and Snap to Pixel, and what happens is whenever you create an object in there, the object will move within that grid that you specify, so it will stay locked to that grid as you move it. So you have these smart guides and smart grid to use in Illustrator that keeps everything locked to that, keeps everything cohesive and looking very neat and tidy. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that grid off just so you can see what's going on underneath this. And I'm going to go ahead and just go through some of the layers just to give you an idea of the simplicity of this UI and how it's just a series of layering of different pieces of objects to this grid. So what we normally do, as I said before, is you draw it all out in a composition, you figure out what the hero object's going to be, And from there, you start developing kind of your look and feel, all the little design elements, all the widgets, all those little things that that are creating the language, the graphical language for this interface. So kind of the first step is we have all these lines and just these splines along a line with a hash applied to them. So they're really simple, really simple shapes. And we kind of go through, and we're just basically creating grids, so you can create grids really simply, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. And we have all these little dots here. These are also aligned to the grid, and I'll show you how to make those. A really quick way to create a grid in Illustrator, if you're creating a circle grid like that, is you just go into Illustrator, you click on the ellipse tool. I'm holding Shift to keep it in proportion. I'm just going to go ahead and fill this in just to make it a bit easier to see. What we're going to do is we're going to Option, drag, and hold Shift. And what we're doing here by holding Option duplicates it, and Shift keeps it locked on the same horizontal dimension as the first circle. So I'm pulling it away, it stays locked. All right, great. I've created 2 shapes. How do you create a grid from that? So what you're going to do now is you take, you go to your Command or Alt, I think it is, on a Windows computer, and you just do Command D, and it's duplicating the last action that you've done. So you can essentially create a very organized kind of line or grid this way. And then what we're going to do is just grab all these. We're going to click Option, pull this down, pull that down to there, and then we just do the same process and we create more grids. So we can do this with anything. You can do this with any shape, and essentially that's what we've done. Normally we'll create an entire composition of these grid-like elements and go in there and start modifying them. You can start deleting some of these elements and making it a bit offset. You can add other, you go in here, you can add, you can duplicate this. So we're going to duplicate that, hold Shift and Command, it duplicates it in place. And then I'm going to hold Command and Shift, and we're going to expand, Option and Shift, and we're going to expand that. And you can see that we're just creating, another little element. So it kind of gives it some interest. Essentially what you're doing is creating a lot of detail very fast. We're going to go back to this composition, and as I showed you before in the slide, our hero element is going in the center of this composition. So what we're going to do is we've created these grid elements in the background. We need to make sure that the hero element sits in this composition without being obstructed by all this detail behind it. So we're adding these gradients to kind of mask that out, and these are very simple gradients. You can create it with the gradient tool. It's essentially one of these shapes. Here, a rectangle tool, and we've applied a gradient to that. And then we're going in here and we're starting to add some text elements. All of our text elements we use are in Adobe's Typekit system. We don't have to worry about licensing. Licensing issues are big with text. If you're creating stuff for films, you need to make sure that everything is licensed and available to use. Typekit's fonts are fantastic, and we're able to use them without an issue, and we can use them across our server because they are all linked together via the cloud, which is very nice. And so we are just starting to add more and more elements along the way, and these are all kind of similar, created with similar techniques. And yeah, you're starting to see some icons. As you notice, we're not filling up the whole composition with these icons. We're putting them in specific locations. We're imagining that if this was a realistic interface, where would they interact with the icons? The hero element's going right in the center. If they're going to push buttons next to it, push buttons to interact with that interface, it'd probably be somewhere near the hero element. We're kind of guessing what these icons would do. Really, it's kind of up to you to imagine what these elements would do and how they function. And we're just going to go ahead and we'd add some more little chevron type elements. These are all kind of basic shapes. And we have all these separate basic shapes as well. These are also created using the rectangle tool and rounded rectangle tool. And what we're essentially doing here is like we did before, we duplicated them over and over again, deleted extra ones, and then applied some text over them to give them some differentiation. But essentially, what this is a lot of layers of things that are aligned to this grid system in Illustrator, and it keeps everything neat and tidy. And yeah, it's essentially kind of the main point when you're creating interfaces. So what we'll do now is our typical workflow when we're working from Illustrator to After Effects. So we've created our entire interface. It's all ready to go to After Effects. We need to figure out what we're going to animate, because when you're animating in After Effects, in interface, it's important. The stuff that's moving is just as important as the stuff that's not moving. So you don't want to animate everything. You want to make sure that there are things happening that make it look alive, but you don't want it to look like it's going, like it's going too crazy, because there are examples of sometimes if a ship is failing or something is happening that's not right, that lots of things could be animating on it. But generally, you want it to feel and look like the interfaces that you interact with on a day-to-day basis. We're trying to replicate the real world to a certain degree and make it believable, but also kind of give it this futuristic look. So what we normally do is we take all the elements that we are wanting to animate, and you see these layers over on the side. We create a new layer, and we bring it to the very top, and we just call it animate. And then we stick all of our layers that we want to animate inside there. So it's really simple. We just grab them, we pull them in there. We're just pulling whatever we want to animate inside there. And so what happens is when we bring it into After Effects, it gives us the option to bring in a composition or a flat layered file. And what you normally do is you bring in a composition and you retain the layer sizes, and you'll have your elements sequenced out into separate files, and then you'll have your base layer, which is not animated at all, and you just lock that at the very beginning. You forget about it and don't touch it again. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and show you the file of all of this combined together. All right, so this is what our files look like when we're creating all this work. As I said before, none of this was made with third-party plugins. We're not using anything fancy here. I'll go through some of these layers and just show you kind of the simple opacity and positional changes that we used. We don't even really use expressions to a massive degree. Essentially, what we're doing for a lot of our expression work, and I'll show you one of the most important expressions that we use all the time is one that is baked into After Effects. So you can see there's an expression here. This is the ease and whiz. This is a simple expression, but one of the ones that we normally do, if we're taking this, okay, there's no animation on it. We want to move it. We're going to delete this expression on here. Say we want it to move up, so we're going to move it in the Y direction, and we want it to do that. And then after a little bit, we want it to move. We're going to copy this keyframe, and we want it to move back down again. We just want it to kind of do that over and over and over again. We're going to go ahead and come over here to this little stopwatch and right-click it while holding Option, and go down to Property and Loop Out Duration. And what this is going to do, it's going to go up and then go down and up and down. It's going to do it over and over and over again. So this is the very basics of kind of what we end up doing. We normally will turn this on to a hold keyframe, so it won't start going down. Yep, cool. And then it's essentially the most technical expressions that we use. I'm going to go ahead and highlight everything and press U, and that's going to reveal all the keyframes in the composition. You can see there's just a positional keyframe on the one we just used. Opacity, a lot of the things in user interfaces are just flashing. Flashing is a very simple way to create activity in the monitor. And we're using transitional elements such as radial wipe, which is really helpful. And most of them are just opacity and positional elements. For these, I had a question yesterday about people asking if we use shape layers. We do use shape layers from time to time, but considering we're working in an on-set type of production, where we have to go on set and create everything very quickly, we tend to keep everything that we can in an Illustrator file because it makes updating things much easier in the long run. So this kind of gives you a basic idea of the type of workflow that we use in After Effects and Illustrator. As I'm just scrolling through here, you can just see it's just opacity changes and positional changes, nothing fancy. I know it looks very complicated, but if you're at home and you're trying to get into this type of work, just sit down, sketch out a composition, try to figure out what you want to create an interface for. It could be something very simple. This user interface is part of the Marvel Galaxy, Marvel Universe. It has a very specific style and feel. We have done work in the past on films like Blade Runner or the recent release of Jack Ryan on Amazon, where we're doing stuff that's much more simple. We're doing HUD work, we're doing drone work. Look at those interfaces, go on YouTube, see how they move, see how simple they are, see that how it's numbers are just counting up digits a little bit. There's not a whole lot of movement going on them. And I think that's the most important part is keep it as simple as you can, have fun with these tools, and know that you don't need the latest software plugins to create work that is interesting. So yes, thank you very much for listening to my talk. Yeah, if you need to get in contact with me or you have any questions about interface work or the type of work that we do, please drop me a line on Twitter. If you have anything you want to share, either share it with myself or the studio, and be happy to help. And thank you very much for listening.